Hello, everyone. Just checking my microphone is on. How's everyone? Was Henry VIII infertile? That's what we're going to be talking about today. There is a paper which has been released a couple of months ago, but we're going to be looking through that. So welcome. I'm streaming live on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And I'll be very happy to see in the comments where you're watching from. I hope you're all well. Winter is persisting here in the form of rain, drizzle, and bleh. So looking forward to spring still. But yes, so streaming live on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Very happy to be with you every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Today we're going to be talking about Henry VIII and his fertility issues. There's this new paper, and we're going to see if it's actually adding anything to the discussion. Hi, I can see people coming in. Hi, Claudia in New York. Yeah, pop a comment in and I will give you a mention if so I was in Tuscany. Oh, I love Tuscany. Bar Harbor, Asher, over there in Maine in the US. So also welcome to you if you're in the catch-up crew, because some people watch this later, and also if you're listening on the podcast, because you can do that as well. Laurie's in North Georgia. Susan, hi. Oh, Brian, that's a cold with a name now. I also have a cold. I don't know if, hopefully you can't see my red nose, but I do resemble Rudolph, and it's the wrong season. So I'm a bit annoyed about that. Caroline in Argentina, Rida in Indonesia, Sean Ali is over there in Texas, Sonia's in Texas, Kelly's in Oklahoma. Yay, we have a massive US contingent today as well then, don't we? How are you all doing? So you can probably hear me wheezing a little bit as well. So apologies for that. Exactly, Doug. It's persisting down. It's persistingly, yeah, persisting. So the main topic today is going to be about Henry VIII. So if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, I will be bringing up the article so that you can see what I'm talking about. If you're watching on YouTube, don't worry, you don't have to be able to see it. But if you do want to pop over to my YouTube, that's where I prefer people to be watching, because I can do more on that. Then it's basically just youtube.com/British history. That is me over on there. So you can do that. Before we get started, just as a little reminder, you can support me with badges on Instagram, super chats on YouTube, stars on Facebook. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Philippa, 1 L and 2 P's. Or what I'd love you to do is join my Patreon. And many of you I can see on here already are members of my Patreon. Hi, Jenna. Hi, Beth. How you doing? I can see Lee's joined as well. Hi, anyone. Sorry, anyone I've missed. So yeah, if you join me on Patreon, because I can give back then, it's £5 a month. You get a blog. The most recent blog has just gone live this weekend about the final days of Elizabeth I. We also, of course, have book club. Now we're on to our second book of book club, and it's this one, Estelle Peronc's Blood, Fire and Gold, the dual biography of Elizabeth I and Catherine de Medici. Has a heavy dose of Mary Queen of Scots in there as well. So this is our second book. The meeting for, tell me if I lose my microphone, I've attached it somewhere. The meeting for this book club meeting is for this book, to discuss this book that I'm holding, is Sunday the 21st of May. So plenty of time, if you're not already a patron, to get in and read the book and come to the book club meeting. So that would be cool. Nancy, have you watched a live before? This is how everyone does it, I'm afraid. Right, so because Nancy is being impatient, and it is my next thing to talk about, let's talk about the article about Henry VIII and was he infertile. Now, it's quite a long article, but I want to go through it because it's an interesting topic. It's interesting how it's tackled, and I think on reading it, it needs to be critiqued. So let's do this. Let's do this, shall we? I'll bring it up on YouTube as well. Apologize, it doesn't zoom in. Don't know why, but if you're watching it on a big enough screen, then maybe you'll be able to see it. So thank you for first of all to Rebecca, who she's a member of my Patreon, and she posted this in over on my Patreon, which is, by the way, patreon.com/British history, to see if anyone else had read it, what we thought of it. It is a journal, an article published in the Journal of Interdisciplinary History in 2021. So this is the first I've heard of it. So it's not too old. So let's have a look at it. Now, it starts off, the title of it, so it's by Valerie Shimplin and Chana Jayasena. I hope I've pronounced this right. No one pronounces my surname or first name right, so I try. But there you go. Hello, Lisa. I also have my cuppa. Cheers. Now, it starts off with, okay, so was Henry VIII infertile? And this is the title of the article, Miscarriages and Male Infertility in Tudor England. And what this is basically trying to do is look at, is there evidence that Henry VIII was infertile compared to his contemporaries? Maria, thank you very much for just mentioning something that I am going to get onto. Actually, let's do it first because Maria's brought it up. So thank you very much. We did have the Georgians Summit, or our online history festival, on the weekend, and it went swimmingly, didn't it? And we had 6 talks. Tracy Borman spoke to us about the mistress of George II, Henrietta Howard, who was her life was incredible, just amazing. The tenacity of that lady, and she was a survivor. She was a survivor. We had Antonia Keeney talk about the real sort of scandals and scoundrels and saints at Blenheim Palace, almost like a real life Bridgerton. We had Illyria Lynn talking about dressing the Georgians, so how court dress, what court dress was like, but how they actually, what was involved. That was fascinating, including how they went to the toilet. We had Gareth Russell talking about Georgian Ireland. That was absolutely fascinating, and an area that I think many of us sort of said, oh, we realise now we knew very little about that. Then we had Kat Marchant, Dr. Kat, talking about pugilists, which was a new word to me. It means bare knuckle, boxers. And we had Anne Stott talk about Princess Charlotte. She has a book called The Lost Queen, and all about Princess Charlotte, the daughter of the Prince Regent, who became George IV. She died in childbirth, and I've spoken about her on here before. Someone who should be much better known, and thankfully is becoming better known about in history. So they were the talks. We also had a live Q&A panel with I think there was 9. How many? I can't how many authors were on there at the time. That we had because we had some extra surprises. Gareth Russell and Tracy Borman joined us at the last minute. We had Dr. Kat on the panel, Antonio on the panel, and then we had Joe Major, James Hobson, and Zoe Wedden, all Georgian authors, and Anne Stott had to join in the comments because for some reason the tech wasn't working and wouldn't let her on stage. But that was a fantastic live panel. And then we had a closing quiz, which was also live. Now, if you missed it, the next one is on sale already. Now, we've got early bird tickets for the next one. The next online history festival, it's November, so it's quite a long way off, but it's about the Tudors. It's going to be similar format, so a number of talks over the weekend, and then a live Q&A panel. This time, though, the Q&A panel is going to be just with the people who've done the talks, and have a closing quiz, and we give away prizes as well. In fact, I in case anyone, I think they all know now, but Tracy's book, there was a signed copy of Tracy Borman's book, was won by Diane. Anne Stott's book, Princess Charlotte, a signed copy of that was won by Cynthia. Anne won her ticket refunded. These are This always happens. This is always a prize at the festival. And Karen won a £15 Amazon voucher. So if you want to come to the next festival, it is on the Tudors. It's the end of November. There are some early bird tickets left. There are 13 early bird tickets left. If you're a member of Patreon, you always get 10% off event tickets. So follow the link from the post in Patreon. Other than that, I'll put it up on YouTube actually and Facebook because I have the address. You go to the Tudors 2023.eventbrite.co.uk and there is a link in my Instagram bio for that as well. And if you wait a little bit longer, a little bit later, I might tell you some of the speakers that we already have because I haven't actually announced those yet, and I will announce them properly and fully next week when I have the full lineup. Okay, now let's get on to what I've promised you I'll cover today. So we're back to, it was Henry VIII infertile. Excuse me. Miscarriages and Male Infertility in Tudor England. This is an article published in the Journal of Interdisciplinary History. So it starts off talking about societies throughout the world have traditionally viewed the production of healthy children as the responsibility of women. I think that's an odd sentence to begin with, actually. Such was evidently. Okay, so I'm going to start to have issues with this straight away. Such was evidently the view of Henry VIII, who clearly blamed his wives for his lack of a healthy male heir. Henry is well known for having married 6 times in his desperate quest for a son, disposing of wives who did not fulfill their royal and marital duty. Now, that is as an introduction, and we'll get into the depth of this article as well, but that as an introduction strikes me as incredibly lazy, regurgitated, received history for many reasons. One, it takes a view of Henry and uses it as evidence of hiya Beth on YouTube, switch to YouTube. Oh yes, that reminds me, I should have put this up, sorry. So yes, and if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, I've just put it up, you can actually see that this is what's in the article. It's much more complicated than that. Hi Denny, how you doing? It's a much more complicated issue than that. This idea that Henry had 6 wives and he went from one to the other to the other to the other is how people get the impression that that they were in quick succession. And it's always a surprise, therefore, when people first learn that the marriage to Catherine of Aragon lasted over 20 years. We're going to get into this in more depth as well, because the timeline is very interesting and it becomes relevant. I don't think that is evidently the view of King Henry VIII, as they've put here, or he clearly blamed his wives for his lack of male heirs. And we'll get into why that is shortly. But just as a first point, starter for 10, if you like, he was we can't underestimate how religious and pious Henry VIII was. I think we like to dismiss him or dismiss that because we don't have a similar, well, some of us do, belief system. If he thought that God was displeased with him, he thought God was displeased with him. I don't think we should dismiss how important Henry's faith was to him, and therefore how important it was, or how clear in his mind it would have been that as a king, if he wasn't having children, what had he done to offend God? If he'd have gone into battle and lost, then that is accepted as God's will. His father, Henry VII, clearly had God's favor because he won on the battlefield against Richard III. So, let me just, sorry, I just need to block somebody. So let's not underestimate how much that comes in. So I think that first bit Henry clearly had this view, and he clearly blamed his wives for not having a healthy male heir. It's just too dismissive for my liking. But anyway, let's keep going. It talks about Henry had fathered 3 legitimate children. But what is less known is the significant number of unsuccessful pregnancies. I don't think it's fair to say unknown. Lisa's on YouTube. Apparently, it's not showing very clearly on Facebook. Oh, but on YouTube, interesting. Oh well, good. At least it's working on one. So we'll get into that in more detail as well. Now, if we go back to the fact that Henry has the 6 wives, he doesn't have them in very quick succession for a start to begin with. Anyway, he's married to Catherine for over 20 years. And there are so there's just this idea that he just goes from one to the other because they don't give him a son. It's just not correct. That's not how it happens. And I think that is that's just a product of looking back on something and having the retrospective view, and it looking like this happened, as if it was always a plan, as if there was always a route that way. Because it goes on to talk about obviously Catherine and Anne had a number of pregnancies between them. It says here 10. Now, Catherine's pregnancies seem to have been well documented, Anne's perhaps less so. So we're not actually completely sure how many times Anne was pregnant. And it talks about he's only had 2 surviving daughters, obviously Mary and Elizabeth, who reached maturity, and Edward died at the age of 15. Now, yes, he died at the age of 15, but he was incredibly ill. The insinuation appears to be that Henry somehow had well, get onto this again so we'll get into all of this in a bit more detail, but that Henry somehow has something wrong with him that means that his offspring don't survive or don't reproduce themselves. Now Edward, if we look at Edward, because he clearly doesn't live into what we would consider adulthood, they considered him old enough to rule on his own, so he was 15 at the time that he died, but he'd caught a malaria-like fever in 1541. He was bedridden with some sort of severe but unidentified disease in 1550. He caught simultaneously measles and smallpox in spring 1552. By October 1552, he was described by a visiting Italian physician as being short-sighted and slightly deaf, perhaps as a result of smallpox, perhaps. And then December 1552, Edward gets ill again. That's the illness from which he never recovers, and he dies the following July in 1553. So I'm not sure what the link is supposed to be that this article is insinuating is somehow linked to him dying early, because that's a lot of illness to deal with. Excuse me. Interestingly, in the footnotes, it says the authors thank an anonymous referee for historical suggestions and references, which might start to explain a little bit why it's a little bit clunky. Now it says here the understanding at this time, if I go on to the next slide, the understanding at this time that men as well as women could suffer problems with infertility was tentative and unlikely to have been countenanced by a Tudor monarch. I mean, that's fair enough. They've got the humoral sciences at this time. Miscarriages are put down to a woman's body being too slippery, that it can't hold on to a fetus. There must be a misbalance, and she's too phlegmy or hot, or I don't know which one they put it down to, but that she couldn't hold on to a pregnancy. Interestingly, and as a bit of a side note, humoral understanding of of science and the body and physiology, it was like 2,000 years old by that point or something. I don't understand how a kind of understanding of how the body works that we would just dismiss as a bit daft now held on for so long. Beth, did Henry have illegitimate children? He did, and I will get onto that actually, because that is something that I think is relevant to, well, it's clearly relevant to how fertile he was. Now, it does say though that well, unfortunately, it says here that space does not allow a complete survey of the late medieval, early modern medical literature that included a mention of male infertility. I would have thought that was highly relevant to this article. Suffice to say, though, that it was not usually, but not always, confined to an inability to perform. So rather than them understanding that the actual quality of the sperm is any different, it's that male infertility was more linked to whether or not you could actually perform. I don't know that is actually universal though, because there are writings talking about, you know, the quality of the seed, and they talk about it as a seed. So there's sort of that assumption there already. Excuse me. Excuse me. Right, so I'm going to skip a couple of slides, and it goes to talking about Henry's. Well, so here it says, undeterred by the small number of late medieval medical texts that do not entirely discount the male roles, Henry's practice of disposing of his wives unmistakably demonstrates whom he considered to blame for infertility. Again, such a sweeping statement. Let's think about the marriages. He marries Catherine of Aragon. They have, and they helpfully actually do put this in a table. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 known pregnancies, 2 of which do result in a live birth. So, of course, 5 of which don't. He's married to her from well, okay, he's married to her for 20 years, but I've got a bit of a timeline that I'll go through a little bit later, about how long they were actually sleeping together for. So he doesn't just dismiss Catherine because she hasn't given him a male heir. He just simply doesn't. He starts he actually starts to, if you want to call it that, dispose of her at the point where she's going through early menopause. She stops menstruating in, I think it's 1525. They understood that if a woman's not having periods, she can't have children. Henry's thinking, have I offended God? What have I done that I'm not having male children? And he complains actually that, even his sort of even sort of the man on the street can have children. Why can't he, as the king? He must have done something wrong. This is not that does not say to me that he is wholly 100% blaming his wives for not having children, for not having a male child. Of course, more than one thing can be true at the same time, and we should always remember that. So where did I get to? Now, Henry, of course, there's a genetic element potentially, but there's also the fact that he his lifestyle choices. So how much is he eating, and the fact that he gets obese in later life. But he spends those first so his 20s and his late teens into his early 30s married to Catherine of Aragon. He then obviously marries Anne Boleyn, but there is a gap. He then very quickly marries Jane Seymour. He then the year after Jane Seymour dies. Is it that quick? He marries Anne of Cleves. That's annulled within 6 months. He marries Catherine Howard. She is executed within a couple of years, and then he marries Catherine Parr. At what point is he looking for a son after Edward VI is born? The marriage to Anne of Cleves is more political. The marriage to Catherine Howard, potentially he's looking for an heir there. I'm pretty sure he wants more than one. He wants his spare, but he's very unhealthy by the time he's marrying Catherine Howard. Is he actually performing by this point? Someone mentioned in the comments somewhere, sorry, I can't remember where I saw it, so apologies, about it actually comes out in public that Henry might not actually be able to perform in bed. Now that's actually that actually comes from George Boleyn reading out something he's been told not to read out in his trial in May 1536, and he reads it out. I have got it here somewhere if I can find it. I won't waste too much time. If I come across it later, I'll bring it out. But basically, yes, it was said. It was said by George Boleyn that he'd heard it from his sister Anne that the king was sort of neither potent or something or other in bed, insinuating that he couldn't actually perform the act. So yeah, and then they talk about the fact that his lifestyle could lead to well, it's not just him, but the sperm is created all the time by men. Women, you're born with your eggs. Women, your eggs are produced when you're so for you in your anyway, it goes back generations. Men, it's depending on your health at the time. So as Henry gets more unhealthy, the possibility is that his sperm is actually damaged, and that can lead to miscarriages, which sounds fairly logical, actually. Now, that is something that perhaps, even if that's accepted as a possibility in the general population, got to remember Henry is a king. He's a God-anointed king. I mean, he takes it to another level and actually says he's not just God's anointed king of England, but he's actually the only intermediary that anyone in his own country needs. So Henry's very important. So how can he not produce children? So what this article tries to do is look at Henry's contemporaries. Is there evidence that Henry has a higher or a lower, should I say, a lower success rate than his contemporaries? So what they've done is look at Henry's. Well, they talk about Henry's medical records. Let me just see. Where am I? Sorry, no, I'm back 160. They talk about how you can get Henry VIII's medical records, and also information about his diet, because you've got records at his palaces of what kind of food was being served. And what they've done is they've taken 31 of his supposed contemporaries, okay, and looked at their marriage and birth records of their so what their marriages produced, basically. So they also go on to say the King of England meant to repudiate his. Oh, this is a quote from that apparently comes from something circulating in 1514. That's very early. I don't think that's true. The King of England meant to repudiate his present wife, since he is unable to have children by her. Now, I don't think that that's him stating that he can't have children by her. I think this is linked into God and him concerned about offending God. So by the 1520s, Catherine is in her mid-30s. She hasn't been pregnant since 1518, and there's a book that Alison Weir's written that that states that or surmises that Catherine actually had stopped her periods by 1525. Now, at that point, Henry knows that he can't have more children with Catherine. So do you see what I'm getting? I'm struggling with this idea that Henry that we're still regurgitating in papers in journals that Henry takes wife after wife after wife after wife in a bid to have a son. When as soon as you look at his marriage to Catherine, he didn't. He slept with her until basically she wasn't going to be able to have children anymore. Anyway, so now back to Beth's question: did he have illegitimate children? He had one. Angela, you can watch it on the playback later or listen to it on the podcast. Yeah, Marie, what sort of stupid cockamamie reasoning and so falsehoods is this? So my concern with things like papers like this is if it starts off with premises that are lazy, how do we what's the point? Kind of. Anyway, let's get into because clearly people are going to read this and make conclusions from it. So that's fine. So let's have a look at it. Now, Henry VIII has one illegitimate child that he acknowledges, Henry Fitzroy, born in 1519 to Bessie Blount. Bessie Blount, that's the end of their affair then. She's married off. She carries on to have more children, which puts paid to the idea that once someone's had a child by Henry, subsequent pregnancies aren't possible. She goes on to have more pregnancies. She has 6 more children, according to this. Now he, excuse me, Henry acknowledges Henry, his son. He's called Henry Fitzroy. Fitzroy is Norman French, Old Norman French, I think, for son of the king. So he's outwardly acknowledging him. Actually, he becomes Duke of Richmond and Somerset when he's 6 years old. Actually, that follows Henry VIII having 2 near fatal accidents. So it's possible that he was priming or starting to plan that Henry Fitzroy may be his only male heir. Was there a way of him becoming, if not king, some sort of very regent? I don't know, something. Obviously, he already had his daughter Mary by Catherine as well. But he also, took the fact that he got this son shows that he's fertile to him and to his court and to his people. I can have male children. Look, I have one, and he's healthy. So, but that doesn't mean that he's blaming Catherine for not having. He might have done. I'm just saying that I can't see the evidence. No one's presenting evidence that says he fully blames Catherine. However, he does think that the marriage goes against God, and he's persuaded of that over quite a time. He doesn't just plant on this idea. Excuse me. And I think it's very likely that he is fully convinced of it anyway, that he has offended God by marrying his brother's widow. And clearly this is evidenced in the fact that he hasn't got any male children. And he has one surviving daughter. Even if you want to take the male-female thing out of it, having one surviving child is dodgy territory in the 16th century. Because actually it says here down, let me just go on down at the bottom of page 160. I'll put, by the way, in YouTube, I'll put a link to this article so that you can all go and read it if you like afterwards. But it says Henry never questioned his own fertility. Okay. Apparently to save face and protect a conviction about his own virility. And he could always fall back on the curse of Leviticus dating to his marriage with Catherine. I think that's really dismissive of his belief. What Why can't he have just fully believed that he defended God? This is a very religious time. Oh, here we are. Here is the bit about his potency. Excuse me. This comes out in the trial of George Boleyn in May 1536. So during Anne Boleyn, because of course Anne Boleyn is hi Jackie, how you doing? Anne Boleyn is of course tried for well, she's tried for treason basically, I suppose, but she's uh she's charged with having 5 affairs with men of the court, one of whom is her brother. So her brother George Boleyn also has a trial. Now during that, um, sorry, 7. Anyway, Anne's brother suggests that Henry was incapable of sexual intercourse. He said out loud, was no good in bed with women, and that he had neither potency nor force, and that was supposed to have come from Anne. So there are questions by the time he's married to Anne Boleyn whether the king actually is performing. Now, of course, then Anne dies. She's executed. He marries Jane Boleyn within days. She gets pregnant and has the boy. She has a boy. She has a live boy. She doesn't survive it, but there's a load of different reasons why that could be the case that could have nothing to do with Henry. And as I said earlier, when he does die at only the age of 15, he has had an incredibly unlucky series of infections, which, even with modern medicine, I would suggest might be very difficult to survive. So there's that as well. Now, it also makes mention, so going back to fertile families, so it talks about how he is there's a table actually, how he compares to 31 of his contemporaries. Now, I'm just going to put this up on YouTube. So for those of you on Instagram, there's a page which visualizes Henry VIII's body. It's not for the faint-hearted. It visualizes what he might have looked like when he got to 28 stone, is the estimation. I mean, can I just read you this bit just as an aside, because I think it's very funny. In his youth, he was a strapping sport enthusiast with a muscular build and a 42-inch chest. By his 30s, however, Henry had become grossly overweight. Estimates gleaned from his clothing and armor indicate that he eventually attained a height of 6'1". I think he might have been 6'1" at the end of puberty, not in his 30s. Anyway, or he was still, clearly it was still his height, but I think he got there a bit earlier than his waist of 54 inches, his chest of 58 inches, and his weight of 180 kilos. I think if he was 180 kilos, his body would be even. I don't think he would have looked like the picture that they've put on there. But anyway, what do I know? I only used to be a PT. So, the 31 contemporaries that he is, for Denny, I can't unsee that now. Oh no. So sorry for everyone on YouTube and Facebook. It's sideways, and on Instagram you're just gonna have to take my word for it that there is a table of supposed these contemporaries. How Owen Tudor is his contemporary, I'm not completely sure. Also, of the 31, 3 didn't have any children. So I don't know if we're taking that as 100% unsuccessful rate. In this, they're taking it as a they didn't have any miscarriages or stillbirths, and therefore they're successful or not unsuccessful. So we could say, there's not even 31 in this. There's 28. You see me do the maths then. Now, it is undeniable that when you look through the table and you've got people like, you've got his father, Henry VII, you've got Cardinal Wolsey, who wasn't supposed to have children, but he did. Who else have you got? You've got Anne Boleyn's father, Thomas Boleyn. You've got Charles Brandon. So people like, so some people who were his contemporaries, some people who clearly weren't, because they lived before him. And his it's just so clunky, his rate of pregnancy loss is 64% compared to the next closest, which is I think 43. However, we don't exactly know how many pregnancies Anne Boleyn had. So it is a clunky figure, but it does look significantly higher than anybody else. What we don't know, though, is how many stillbirths, miscarriages of all these other people were actually, well, their wives clearly, were actually recorded. So, yeah, incredibly clunky way of doing it. So, also, I think this is something to consider that they haven't considered there. I mean, there's loads of other factors to consider, of course, in terms of how many pregnancies a couple manages to have, how many stillbirths that couple have, how many how many children survive the birth. There's lots of other factors to consider, but if you just look at how many pregnancies, how do we know how many times these couples are having sex? To put it very bluntly, Henry's at court. He's with people all the time. His visits to his wives have to be organised. Maria, really annoyed over the mountain of stupid inaccuracies. This is so-called article contains that this article contains cause people who don't even have the barest, even most basic knowledge over all this. Yeah, people will believe it. This is why I wanted to cover it today, because I started reading it. I thought it's so. It uses really lazy tropes and then extrapolates from those supposed answers or insinuates answers, because I'll tell you their conclusion a little bit later on. So I've done a little bit of a timeline, because I was thinking, well, if these couples married, so a lot of these couples it lists the men, and it lists how many wives the men had, and then how many children they had total, how many pregnancies resulted in a miscarriage or stillbirth, and therefore from that calculate the rate of pregnancy loss. Most of these men have had one or two wives. Charles Brandon's up there with 4, but most of them have had 1 or 2. Thomas Wolsey obviously none, because his children were all illegitimate. Now, so my assumption from that being that there is a steady relationship there. Let's just have a look. So this is Henry's timeline. 1518, Catherine has her final pregnancy. 1518. 1519, Henry Fitzroy is born to Blessy Blount, but that is the end of their affair. 1522, Henry has his affair with Mary Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's, we think Anne Boleyn, that's when it starts, Anne Boleyn's sister. He doesn't recognise any of her children as his, and I've seen very circular arguments for trying to evidence that at least one of Mary Boleyn's children were Henry VIII's. They are incredibly circular. There's no concrete evidence, and he never recognizes them as his. Could it be that the first one was a girl? Maybe, but if we think if we're going to take what they say here, that he blames all his wives for his infertility, for their infertility, and he blames it solely on his wife, which I don't think he did, but if we take it as read here, as they've put it here, that he does, why isn't he recognizing every illegitimate child that he has? I would have thought that that would be something he would do. So anyway, so Henry Fitzroy is born in 1519. He has his affair with Mary Boleyn from around 1522 to 25. Then Anne Boleyn, sorry, is also at court from 1522. Obviously is more interested in her sister for a short while. In 1524, we think he stops going to Catherine. And if Alison Weir's narrative is correct, Catherine is beginning to go through menopause anyway in the mid 1520s. Hear me wheezing, I'm so sorry. Henry doesn't sleep with Anne Boleyn until 1532. So the official marriage date for Henry and Anne is in January 1533, but Anne, is already pregnant at that point. So there is some evidence that they were married the previous November 1532 when they arrived back from France, that they were married at Dover, and that is when Anne would have allowed Henry to sleep with him, which, by the way, if you think about it, means she got pregnant immediately. So they haven't mentioned that. So if we're saying he's infertile or he has issues with his sperm, she gets pregnant almost immediately, or immediately. By the January, she is known to be pregnant. That was with Elizabeth. 1536, Anne is executed. 1537. So he then Henry marries Jane Seymour pretty much immediately afterwards, and Edward is born in 1537. So this isn't stacking up with the kind of assumptions that are made here. But my point of that timeline is Henry's not really sleeping with people very much for a very long time. If these men who are married to one or two wives are how do I put this nicely for a lunchtime? If they're regularly getting it on with their wives, statistically, surely it's just more likely there's going to be more pregnancies. Henry spends a long time not sleeping with people. Lisa says, could a DNA test be done between Henry's body and the bodies of Mary's children? I suppose. I don't know. I don't know how much material is left from that is useful for that kind of thing. If it is, and their bodies are accessible, I don't know. I have a bit of I have a thing about. I'm not keen on the idea of, say, the princes in the Tower bones, which are in Westminster Abbey, of them being looked at, and I know lots of people are. Although one of my issues with that is that it won't tell people what they want to know, which is who killed them. I mean, they just won't know. I suppose it tells you whether they've died or whether they escaped. Christina, during these times, how far along were women before they realised they were with child? That is a really good question. I have a friend, Leslie Smith, who is a curator at Tutbury Castle, and she's an expert in 16th century women's health. I might ask her that, because I wouldn't assume, or should I put this another way? I actually would assume that they were more in tune with their bodies than we are now. I think they would have been more in tune with a lot of natural things than we are now. So I wonder actually whether they'd know quite quickly. So I think, excuse me, the marriage in between Anne and the possible wedding ceremony between Anne and Henry in November 1532 could have followed her allowing him to sleep with him. That's what David Starkey surmises in his book about the six wives, that on the journey back from France, Anne allows Henry to sleep with her. Now, of course, he wants a legitimate heir, so getting married to her is of utmost importance. So that's yeah, that's that. So I think, so as well, yeah. So Henry's known to say things like, let me find, what page is this on for you watching on YouTube? 172, yes. So he goes to, he's at the Seymour's house, Wolfhall, made very famous now, of course. And he commented on Seymour's ability to father so many children being unfair, given that he, as king, had so little success. He's talking about the fathers. He's not talking about the mothers. He's talking about Henry is talking about the fathers. He's not talking about the women. So, yeah, now let me tell you then how they conclude this. Let's see. Actually, hang on. There's a bit more as well. So it says here, despite the evidence, the limitations of this study make it impossible to prove, conclusively that Henry was infertile. I don't actually know what evidence they are referring to, despite evidence, and I've put next to it, what evidence? This is all conjecture, and really lazy one at that, in my opinion. So it goes on. Gosh, I've lost my place. Sorry, excuse me for a moment. Because they say that Henry, as the source, the unusual preponderance of bad pregnancy outcomes or no pregnancy at all involving multiple female partners, however, strongly implicates Henry as the source of the problem. Again, he's clearly not been the problem at some points, and maybe been the problem at other points. Now, as he gets older, and they do talk quite extensively in this article about the link between health and age, and then the quality of the man's sperm, so that then you get a successful pregnancy. And clearly Henry becomes unwell, unhealthy. He is significantly overweight. He eats a significant diet but interesting as well, they very lazily refer to a diet high in meat as a bad diet, and then mention that he has 5,000 calories a day. I think the calorie total might have a lot to do with it, actually, regardless of how he gets those calories. And actually, I don't think you could get to eat 5,000 calories worth of meat would take some doing. There's a lot of carbs in there. There's a lot of sugar in there. So strongly implicates Henry as the source of the problem, regardless of the numerous pregnancies for which he's also partly responsible. I just love that phrase. He was partly responsible for those. I suppose that is technically true. But yes, that basically they couldn't conclude anything. I'm not surprised. Are you, after all that? But I wanted to go through that article because I think it's really important to critique things like this that are put across, because clearly you have to get right to the end. If you didn't know what we already know from talking about Henry quite often, you'd have to get to the end to realize that they actually haven't come up with any conclusion. What is interesting though, and I wholeheartedly support this, is they talk about the stigma attached to men whose wives who have infertility problems, and how maybe knowing that a Renaissance king had the same problem might somehow give them some support. I'm not quite sure why Henry VIII would help with that, but I do fully I get behind the there shouldn't be a stigma attached to men for that. So I hope you enjoyed rattling through that. I've got all my notes here. Maybe if you're a member of my Patreon, if you're interested, if you want me to, I'll scan in my copy of this article with my notes next to it if you want, and you can see where I was what I put in there. But other than, if you just want the clean article, I will put the link to that underneath the YouTube video when I finish this today. Excuse me. Oh, I am struggling today, everybody. I'm so sorry. This is my vitamin C drink I'm on to now. So thank you, Rebecca, for sending that article my way. If you have anything that you read, see, that you want me to comment on, send it to me. I'm very happy to have a look, and if it fits with what I can talk about, then I will. So you can send me this sort of stuff if you want to DM me on Instagram. Obviously, if you're a member of my Patreon, you can pop it in there, yeah, or you can DM me. If you're going to message me on Instagram. If you're a patron, obviously you can get me on there. Now, tonight I am back at 8:15 with History After Dark. Maria says yes, please. Okay, yes, I can scan in my notes, and I will post them into my Patreon. So anyone who is not a member of my Patreon who wants to be, it's £5 a month. And you get things like my notes on things like this. Clearly, it's patreon.com/British history. Not only that, but you get immediate membership of our book club. There's a new blog just gone in there on Elizabeth I's final weeks. And I'm about to ask for questions for my next interview, which is with Julian Humphreys about the Battle of Tewkesbury. That will go live in May, but I'm about to ask for the questions for that. So I'd love to see you on Patreon as well. We've got a really, really lovely little community going there now. So, but I am back tonight with the History After Dark girls, 8:15 tonight, history.after.dark on Instagram, History After Dark on YouTube. And tonight we have the next in our Deceased Git series, and it's John Knox. We're talking about John Knox tonight. Interesting figure. You may have heard of him. He had a pamphlet called the first. What was it? The full title, was it something like the first trumpet on the monstrous something of women? Basically, he was a Protestant reformer on the thrones of France, Scotland, and England at the point that he published this pamphlet. Were all Catholic, were all women, were all Catholic. He may heavily have regretted publishing that just as Elizabeth I, Protestant, came to the throne. So John Knox was born and raised in Scotland. He's got an interesting life. So we're talking about him on History After Dark tonight. That's 8:15. Love to see you there. Remember, if you're interested in why wouldn't you be, in coming to the Tudors Online History Festival, it's in November. It is a long time off, but if you want an early bird ticket, there, I don't know, before I came live, there were 13 left. And as you've stayed for almost an hour, let me give you a little insight. I can tell you 3 speakers that are definitely coming. Oh, Monstrous Regiment of Women. Was that what it was, Doug? Thank you. So, confirmed speakers for the Tudors Online History Festival. Tracy Borman will be back. She'll be talking about the relationship between Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I. Gareth Russell will also be speaking. I don't know what he's speaking on yet, but I will let you know as soon as he lets me know. And Cat Marchant will be talking about Shakespeare, of course, one of the most famous Elizabethans. So they're 3 already, and the other 3 I will let you know next week when they are fully confirmed, but I can promise you that they are people you are going to be definitely wanting to listen to. So you can go to the tudors2023.eventbrite.co.uk to get your ticket. If you missed the Georgians Online History Festival or last November's the Stuarts Online History Festival, all the talks of those are available as an add-on to your ticket for that if you want to purchase that, and those you can get hold of immediately, so you can have a good catch up. All right, everybody. So hopefully I'll see you tonight at History After Dark. 8:15. Like I say, streaming live will be on history.after.dark on Instagram and History After Dark on YouTube. Marie says, yes, I was hoping for those three in particular. Well, they are there, and you wait till I tell you who the other three are. I'm chomping at the bit to tell you. If you can't, if I can't see you tonight, if you can't come tonight, then I'll be back here. Actually, I won't be here. I will be out and about next Wednesday. So keep an eye out for updates on my stories, and I will let you know what I am doing and where you can find me. It's exciting. It's good. Right, everybody. Thank you for spending this hour with me. That has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you to everyone who's bought me badges on Instagram, stars on Facebook, super chats on YouTube. Come and join me on Patreon if you want some history stuff all the time. It's £5 a month, so it really is the best value. And I will see you hopefully there or here later on. All right, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.